going to have a wonderful presenter, Dr. Biju Raghavan, who is a senior consultant and HOD in pain and palliative medicine at Rajagiri Hospital, Aluva, Ernakulam in Kerala. And he has been practicing palliative care since 2003. So for the past 17 years, he is in this palliative care setting, and he is a visiting faculty at TIPS Trivandrum, MNJ Institute of Oncology and RCC Hyderabad, and a lot more settings like that. So I would like to welcome you, sir, to this wonderful session. And please, sir.
Thank you so much, Gayatri, for your kind introduction. Since we are working on very tight time frame, I think we should start. Are we ready to start?
Yes, sir. Sure.
Okay. So I would like to welcome all the delegates who have joined this program from all over. And as Gayatri mentioned, today we are going to talk about communication. We plan to do it in two parts. Part one will be today, and part two will be next Wednesday, same time. In part one, we'll be talking about some basics of communication, and part two, we will go into some specific areas of communication. So, if we are ready to roll, can you please start sharing the screen from your end, Gayatri?
Sure, sir. Sir, is it visible now?
Yes, it's very much visible. Thank you. Yeah, you can have. Can we have the next slide, please? Right. So, as we know, communication is key to any relationship, and within communication, active listening is the most important component. Now, when we talk about active listening, what exactly goes into having a successful active listening, which will lead to good communication, and the end product is satisfaction on the part of the patient and families. Because when people come to the healthcare system, they don't come to us because they want to come to us. As we can all agree, if we have some spare time, we would rather go to the movie theaters or go to the hotel for a good dinner, or maybe go to the beach or an amusement park or a resort. Nobody likes to go to the hospital. It's only when you are ill, that is not well, when you are suffering, that is the only time, and that is the only reason, usually, when you would come to a hospital. So, to start off with, we in the healthcare industry, our interaction with our patient and family starts with a negative, and that is why healthcare communication is a bit challenging, because you start with a negative of suffering and illness, and hence how you communicate will be the perhaps the most crucial deciding factor on how they feel. And when they go from the hospital, it doesn't matter how many degrees you have, or how big the hospital is, or how fancy gadgets you have. They will go and remember how they were made to feel, and that is what people remember. And how they were made to feel is an emotional reaction, and that is why it is important to have good communication, because it enhances that sense of being cared for, being looked after. And that is why today we are having this session. Next slide, please. And to talk about active listening, I am just dividing it into two parts. One is the body language part, which is the major part of communication. And then there is the verbal do's and don'ts. The whole idea of talking about these 2 points is to enhance your active listening skills. Obviously, active listening just does not mean just sitting and listening to people. You have to make them feel that they have been listened to. Next slide. Many times, and most of the times, when we are interacting with patients and families, we are not aware of what our body is doing while we are talking to them. But they can see what our body is doing. They can hear uh, what is the tone of our voice. They can see whether we are making eye contact. They can see uh, whether there's a smile on our face. But we are not able to see ourselves. And most of the time, we are not aware of how our body is reacting to the patient and family while we are interacting with them. So it is very important that we have to be very aware of our own body because our body is speaking. And many a times, what we verbalize may not be in sync with what our body is telling them, right? So it is very important to be aware of your own body and how it is interacting with the people in front of you. Next slide. So this Albert Mehrabian model says that a major component, 55% is body language, around 38% is the voice, the quality of voice, the tone of voice, and about 7% is the actual spoken words. There may be variations, there may be other school of thoughts, but by and large, those who are doing research and communication and all have come to the same conclusion that the major component of communication is non-verbal, body language, voice of tone. And the smaller component is the verbal component. Most of the time we are focusing on what we are saying, but it is how we say and what our body is doing while we are saying what we are saying. That is the important part. But most of the time we are not aware of it. Next slide. So when we talk about body language, it's a vast topic. We obviously we can't cover it in the time frame we have because it takes years for people to learn and practice and master body language. It's a vast area. But for today's session, I'm just taking very few points, around 6 or 7 points, which will help you practice better active listening skills using these positive body language components. Next slide. The first is eye contact. Eye contact is next slide, please. So the most important component and the engine that which starts the relationship building, the first thing, the spark, if you may, is eye contact. Without eye contact, you cannot engage with another human being. So it is very important that when we are interacting with people, we make an eye contact, right? So when we are talking about eye contact, there is science to it, right? And uh, when we look at people, sudden jerky movements. For example, if you're sitting and somebody comes approaches you, you suddenly look up. The person may get scared. It's very important to have a you start with a gentle looking up or gentle eye contact, and then when you are established on eye contact, you don't stare somebody in the eye. Eye contact does not mean looking only in the eye, right? So there is a part of the face which I'll talk about. So it is very important that you make an eye contact, and then along with it, you can also, while you are having this conversation, nod your head. Next slide. So this is an area which would be a good area, that inverted triangle, 1, 2, 3, right? This 3-pointed inverted triangle is a good triangle to look into when we are talking about making eye contact. You don't stare into somebody's eyes. If you can practice with a friend, if you see that if you look at the person above the triangle, that is onto the forehead, it will be a very unsatisfactory conversation. If you were to talk to somebody, if you look at the above the triangle, if you look at the sides of the triangle, that is near the ears, and there also, if you continue to talk to the person by looking at the other person's ears, there also you will find it's uncomfortable. And definitely, if you go below the triangle, it will also make the other person very uncomfortable. So a comfortable way of communicating is focusing. Your eyes can roam around in that triangle. It's a good triangle to make eye contact. Next slide. Most important, smile. Smile and the world will smile with you. You be grumpy and you are grumpy alone. And doesn't matter whether you are wearing a mask, because nowadays everybody is required to wear a mask. So don't think that if you wear a mask, you don't have to smile, because your smile can still be seen in your eyes, and your smile can be heard in your voice. I repeat, even if you're wearing a mask, smile, because your smile can be seen in your eyes and your smile can be heard in your voice. Needless to say, voice is very important. Next slide. And as I said earlier, it is also a major component of communication. So it's very important that we have a pleasant tone in our voice. Now, I will give you a small tip. If you practice smiling, that is, if you practice smiling when you are in your professional environment, your voice quality will automatically improve. You don't have to do much effort in improving the tone of your voice. You just have to practice smiling, because you cannot have a bad tone of voice when you are smiling. So that's a tip. So whenever you're in a professional environment, when you're dealing with patients or their families, always have a smile in your voice. Always have a smile on your face, and it will reflect in your voice also. Your voice will be nice if you have a smile on your face. Next slide. Okay. Another very important component of positive body language is how you position your body in relation to the patient, or for that matter, the family member. Most of the time, when we are visiting a patient in the hospital, in the IP, you focus on the upper left picture on the screen. So there is one lady healthcare professional standing by the bedside of the patient. And then focus on the upper right picture, where you have a gentleman healthcare professional sitting by the bedside of the patient. Now, there are many research and studies which have shown that if you sit down, it increases the satisfaction of the patient and families. But most of the time when we go for rounds, we do not sit down. When I say it is good practice to sit down, I'm not saying you spend more time. I'm saying whatever time you have been spending when you go for a round, it can be 5 minutes. But instead of standing for 5 minutes, Just sit down for 5 minutes and you will definitely improve the satisfaction level of the patient and family. It is a psychological thing, because when you bring down the body, your body position at equality with the patient and family members' body position, it is more satisfactory because there is no hierarchy. Whereas if they are sitting or lying down and you are standing, their body positions is creating hierarchy, and hierarchy is either superior or inferior, right? And as a healthcare provider, in the healthcare environment, you are always going to be superior, irrespective of the your social and financial status compared to the patient's social and financial status. Your social and financial status may be lower than the patient's social and financial status. However, in the healthcare environment, you being a healthcare provider, automatically you will be the superior person, and the patient and patient party will be the inferior person, for the simple reason that you are healthcare provider and they are healthcare receiver. So that distinction will create a hierarchy. You being a provider will be up in hierarchy, and they being receiver will be down in hierarchy, irrespective of their social and financial status. As a result, if we do things which will increase the distance between you and them, it will cause less satisfaction. And if you reduce the distance between you and them, it will increase satisfaction. That is why it is important to sit down so that you can bring yourself to the level of the patient when they are on bed. Similarly, when they come to the OP to meet you, always offer them a chair to sit down. I mean, patient and family. The bottom picture, no, can you go back, please? The bottom picture shows a healthcare professional interacting with the child. Now, see, he is not standing and bending over the child. He is on his knees so that he is at eye level with the child. So, whether the child is sitting on a chair or on a bed, you have to put yourself in a sitting position. If you don't have a chair, definitely you must go bend on your knees so that you can be at eye level. Or the simple thing is just pull up a chair and sit down so that you are at eye level with children. Many a times as adults, we automatically bend down at the hip, towering over the child. So that also creates hierarchy, superior, inferior. So the just like you would respect an adult, we have to show respect in our body language with a child. Remember, it is not enough to love a child, it is also important to respect a child. So these are the important body positions I was talking about. Now, going back to the top two pictures, on the left hand side, you can see that the healthcare professional is standing closer to the head end of the patient, whereas on the upper right, you can see the gentleman healthcare professional sitting by the foot end of the patient. The important thing why I'm telling you about this, if you're standing or sitting near to the head end of the patient has to turn the neck to look at you, and that can be uncomfortable after some time. Whereas if you are sitting by the foot end of the patient can look at you comfortably for whatever duration you're sitting there. So my suggestion is, whenever you go to see a patient in the hospital on your rounds, make it a point to sit down at the foot end of the patient. That is the most important suggestion I can make to you today. Sit down at the foot end of the patient so that the patient can look at you comfortably. And this sitting down will increase the satisfaction. Next slide, please. Just like body position, another important aspect is body posture. Just look at these two pictures. Who would you like to speak to? The one on the left, the gentleman who has put his leg up, or the lady on the right? Who seems more approachable? I think the answer is very clear, the one on the right. So when you are interacting with somebody, it is important you start the interaction by a little bending forward of your spine. If you are interacting with somebody with your, back arched backwards, that is a very arrogant position. It is also creating hierarchy. You're showing that I am superior to you, and that is going to create distance, and any distancing is going to reduce satisfaction. So to reduce the distance, you have to bend a little forward, not too much forward, just slight bend forward like this lady's on the right side. Next slide.
Sir?
I will uh, so I will go off the video. I'll only be on audio, right? Okay. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir. Perfect. We can hear you.
All right. So these are two examples of leaning forward in front of you. This is, a very simple, just to give some clarity on what we mean by leaning forward. It is not leaning forward too much. It is just how you would interact normally. But the important point that I'm trying to explain is that leaning backward is only going to increase the distance. It seems like arrogant. So that is why I'm explaining the importance of leaning forward. And this will also have implication when we are dealing with uh, other situations, which we will talk about next week. Next slide. Another important thing that you must remember is about respecting the personal space of people. Uh, we all have our intimate space where we allow only those whom with we are intimate. And then we have a social space where we allow people with whom we are socially connected. They may be our colleagues, they may be our distant relatives, they may be people we know, but we are not very intimate. So it will be a little bit more distant. And then there are other people, strangers whom we don't know, and that would be the public space, right? So there are spaces. However, in healthcare, we may not be related to the patient, we may not know them, we are strangers to them, they are strangers to us. But because we are in the healthcare business, we may have to, in as part of our healthcare activity, we may have to invade their personal space. We may have to get into the intimate space. And this can be uncomfortable, even though we are healthcare providers and they are patient and they came to us. Still, uh, even though there is an implied consent, but even an implied consent, it is essentially a, uh, cognitive part. That is, it is something that your brain tells you. But the discomfort of your personal space being invaded is a emotional reaction. So even if the patient has come to us of their own free will, and the patient has come to us for treatment, and we have to touch them examine them, etc., which is invasion of their personal space, still it can be uncomfortable to the patient. We have to remember that. So to minimize their discomfort, before we touch them, before we invade their personal space, we must tell them what we are going to do, so that if we suddenly start, palpating their tummy and suddenly start taking out a step and start auscultating their chest, it may be little uncomfortable. So just before you do it, just tell them what you're going to do. So telling them what you're going to do will help them mentally prepare for the invasion of privacy. And that courtesy of telling them before you invade their personal space is respecting their body space. Next slide, please. Now there are two examples of uh, this body space concept. On the left hand side, you have a healthcare professional who is invading the personal space of the patient, and you can see the patient's reaction. The patient is trying to move back in the wheelchair as much as possible, right? And on the right, you have a healthcare provider, a lady healthcare provider sitting with the patient, and look at the comfort level between the two. And both of them are sitting, the body position is the same, and they are leaning towards each other, right? The lady healthcare provider's head is tilted towards the patient. The patient's head is tilted towards the healthcare provider, and at the same time, there is a comfortable distance. So the distance is decided by the two people. It automatically comes in the picture. But sometimes we, like in the photo on the left side, we may unknowingly enter into the comfort space, and this is the reaction we are going to see. So whenever, first of all, we should try to avoid sudden movements, leaning forward, etc., and make sure that we are having the patient in a comfortable space. So that is what respecting the patient space is concerned. Next slide, please. And the last part on body language is touch. I know that we are having this pandemic going on since last year, and in the initial days, even I was very afraid to touch my patients for a couple of months, maybe 6, 7 months. I also made sure I was not touching my patients unnecessarily. Absolutely essential, I would be wearing I would wear a glove, and to do the bare minimum physical examination. But over a period of time, I realized that touch has a huge therapeutic value. It has a healing property. And it is very important that we do not abandon our patients. That means we do not stop touching them. So I got over my fears, and now I make it a point, like before the pandemic, I'll always make it a point that I'll touch them. And I'm not talking about touching them to check their pulse or BP or auscultating their chest or palpating their tummy. I'm not talking about the medical procedures. I'm talking about a human to human touch, just a touch on the shoulder or a touch on the arm or a handshake. So I have restarted doing that. And in front of the patient itself, after I touch them, I use sanitizer and wash my and clean my hand. That you must do. You have to protect yourself. You have to use sanitizer. But I am imploring you that do not stop touching your patients. That's a human touch that each of your patients would be craving for, especially these days. So touch the patients, but when you are leaving them, touch them on the shoulder or give a handshake, whatever is appropriate, and then use the sanitizer and then wipe your hands thoroughly. You can do it right in front of them. Nobody minds that. Okay. So that is the important thing that I wanted to convey on the non-verbal aspects of communication. Next, we will be doing some, next slide, we'll be talking about some verbal do's and don'ts. even though we say that the verbal part is the smaller part in communication. However, it is very important to know some important do's and don'ts. There are a lot of do's and don'ts, but because of time constraint, I'm not going to talk about all of them. Next slide, please. Okay. The most important thing is you must always ask open-ended questions, whether you're seeing them for the first time or the 10th time or the 100th time. Always ask open-ended questions. Do not ask leading questions. A leading question would be something like, your pain is better now, isn't it? Or you are feeling better now, isn't it? So that kind of a questioning, sometimes a patient or often a patient may not be able to say, no, I am not better, so your medicine did not help me at all. Most patients may not be able to say this because of the hierarchical. There might be some empowered patients who may be able to say, no, I am not better. But many times when you ask in this tone, in a leading question tone, then you probably may get a wrong answer. The patient may, nod their head or say, okay, yes, or something like that. But you may be getting the wrong answer, right? And as a result, you may think that everything is fine, but actually things may not be fine. So you can just ask the patient, so how are you? Or how are you today? Whatever. So you can just ask a leading, open-ended question, not a leading question. Next slide. So do not minimize and do not compare your patient's problem, whether it is a physical problem or a mental problem, whatever it is. For each person, their problem is the only problem and the biggest problem. So when you see somebody who is, according to you, getting very, very anxious about a small thing, according to you, a small thing, but for the patient, it is a big thing. So if you say, oh, this is such a small thing, why are you so anxious? That is not going to help the patient. From your point of view, you have said a nice thing. But from the patient's point of view, they are saying, this person doesn't care. This person doesn't understand my problem. It is very important. Do not minimize or do not look at look at the children's ward. There is so much of suffering, and you are such a big grown-up person, and you are complaining. So do not compare also. For each person, their problem is the biggest problem. So minimizing or comparing is only going to make them feel that you don't care, you don't understand. It's very important to acknowledge and normalize their emotional experience of the situation. You do not normalize the situation, you normalize their emotional experience of the situation. For example, considering what you are going through, it's perfectly okay to feel like that. Or anybody in your position would be feeling like that or behaving like that. So you are saying that the way you are behaving, considering the situation you find yourself in, that is okay. You are giving them permission to, feel distressed. It is their right to feel distressed about their distress. So are not minimizing it, you are not comparing it, you are acknowledging it. That does not mean you do not do anything about it. Of course you have to relieve their distress, but the point is you acknowledge that they are in distress and you give them permission that it is okay, anybody in your position would feel like that, so that you are not adding guilt to their already distressed situation, or you're not already adding more distress by saying, oh, this is nothing. I hope that part is clear. Next slide, please. Often when we are dealing with very sick patients, many a times the tendency for healthcare providers is to tell them some nice words, Don't worry, everything will be all right. We are there with you, etc. Knowing fully well that that is not the truth. The problem with giving false hopes is, from your point of view, you said some nice words, but for the person who received your false hope, the person will hang on to it, hoping and knowing that what you said is true. But when it doesn't happen like that, they are totally devastated. So it is the worst crime possible you can do, to give false hopes to somebody who is very sick. In fact, you should not give false hopes to anybody, especially to somebody who is very sick. But what you need to do is give realistic hope. Now, that is the biggest advantage of my palliative medicine education, that unlike specialties who deal with disease and disease diagnosis and disease treatment, a palliative care professional doesn't ever have to say nothing more from my side. Even if the patient is terminally ill, a palliative medicine specialist, a palliative physician, has always something realistic hope to offer. Even if somebody is terminally ill, I can give a realistic hope that I'll make sure that you remain comfortable as long as you are alive. I may not be able to cure your disease, I may not be able to save you, but I'll make sure that you are comfortable as long as you need it. Now, that kind of realistic hope, in my personal experience, is what people are looking for. Because whenever I say something like that, they tell me in Malayalam, they say, Adu keta madi doctor. That means that is all that we wanted to hear. This is a very, very common expression I hear when I tell them, I can't save you, but I'll make sure you don't suffer. And they say, this is all that we wanted to hear. So realize the importance of giving realistic hope, and always, always remember, never give anybody false hopes. That is the worst crime you can do against humanity. You may think you're doing a good thing by doing it, but in the end, it is never a good thing. It is so. We always see this in cinemas and TV serials. We always see people giving false hopes, but in real life, it creates a lot of complication, a lot of problems. So it is okay to have it on movies and TV serials. It is absolutely not okay in real life. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Now again, another important part. Whenever somebody says anything, do not take it totally at face value. Ask them, why did you say that? If somebody says, I'm so sad, if somebody says, I'm so scared, if somebody says, I just wish I were dead, somebody says, am I going to die? Whatever, when people say things like that, you always ask them. Do not assume why they said what they said. Just ask them and they will tell you why they said what they said. Do not assume, always ask. Because when you assume, there's a big chance of you are probably be very mistaken, and that can have disastrous consequences. This is illustrated in this example I have put in. From our side of from if somebody says I'm so worried, and we say, oh, don't worry, we are all there with you, we have all the medicines to keep you comfortable, and things like that. But probably the patient was not at all worried about himself. He was probably worried about his children going hungry. And then you're saying, don't worry, we are there with you. Are you going to feed the children? Or are you going to get the children married off? Or are you going to take the responsibility for their education? There are a lot of things we can't do. So we have to find out what are the concerns of the patient. Why are they saying what they're saying? And the simplest thing to do is to ask them, why did you say that? Next slide, please. So I'll conclude with the last 2-3 slides. We have been taught how to take the history in our medical education, and we all know that. However, I just wanted to improve upon it. That is why history taking 2.0. First and foremost, whenever you meet people, greet them. You make an eye contact, you smile and nod your head, and whatever is culturally appropriate in your environment, you verbalize something. If it is culturally appropriate not to verbalize, then at least an eye contact, smile, and the nod of the head should be there. Once greeting is done, get comfortable, offer a seat to the patient and family if they have come to see you in your consultation room, or if you have gone for rounds, like I showed before, you sit down by the bedside of the patient and start the interview with an open-ended question. You can say, okay, what brings you here? Or tell me, or how are you? And once you have started the interview, then learn to listen. You sit and listen. There are many studies which have shown that, especially doctors, interrupt within the first 15 seconds. I'm not saying first 15 minutes, I'm saying first 15 seconds. Next slide, please. And not only you should sit and listen, you have to encourage the patient to talk. This you do by maintaining eye contact, nodding your head from time to time, and making encouraging sounds like okay, all right, okay, go on. So this kind of words and sounds will encourage the patient to continue whatever the patient has been saying. If you don't make a sound and just sit, sometimes the patient may wonder, should I continue or not? In case you didn't understand anything or some part of what the patient was telling, clarify it on the point. Do not wait for the whole thing to get over to clarify, because sometimes the conversation may go into some other direction and you may forget what was it that you didn't understand. So at any point, you stop the patient right there and tell, what did that say, or what did you mean by that? You clarify as you go along. It's also important to ask them what they understand about the situation. What is their understanding? So by asking them, what did the doctor there tell you? What do you understand by the reports you have? What is the plan? What is your understanding about the situation? So these kind of questions will help you understand about what they understand about what is going on. Then you also ask them what their concerns are. So what is it that worries you most? What is your most important priority here? So this kind of questioning can elicit what is their concerns. Next slide, please. And then share the information honestly. Now, this is sometimes very difficult for doctors because we are so used to talking in medical jargon, which we understand perfectly, but for the general public, it sounds like Greek and Latin. So it's very important to make sure you are conveying complex medical information in an easy to understand common man's language. Now that is a skill. It is hard to do because we are just not used to it. But we have to make an effort to do it. And to know how much of jargon you are using, it is best if you just start recording, audio recording your conversation with your patient and family, and then playing it back to you at a later time. And you will be amazed how much of jargon you are using. Well, while we are speaking, we may not realize it, but recording it and hearing it back will help you. And this feedback mechanism will help you develop methods, skills to use simple language over a period of time. Now, healthcare is a shared decision-making process. Earlier, the doctor would say, this is what needs to be done. You can take it or leave it. But nowadays, it is not like that. Within the healthcare system, it is team work that is going on for a patient's care. Usually, more than one specialist are involved. It's usually, especially for serious health conditions, usually a multi-specialty team is involved in patient care. But one thing is missing in it is what is the patient and family's opinion on how we need to move forward. So that also needs to be factored in. After all, it is the patient's body, it's the patient's life. And along with the patient, the family also has a stake in the patient's well-being. So it's very important that as healthcare professionals, we involve them, make them understand what is going on, tell them what are the options, and what, according to you, is the preferable option. And then listen to them. What do they think about it? What are their problems? What are their limitations? And then work out what is the most practical way to go forward. You will have to understand that people have their beliefs, their fears, their phobias, and and their financial constraints, logistical constraints. There's nobody to come and stay with the patient in the hospital, or they don't have enough money. So you may have an excellent, beautiful plan of management for the patient, but if they just can't afford it, then what do you do? Or if there's just nobody to come and stay with them or to care for them, then what do you do? So then you will have to modify the plan. So all of this is called a participatory decision making by consensus, the consensus of the patient, family, and the medical professionals. And once you have the decision, you summarize what all has been taken up, and then you close the interview. Next slide. Closing the interview. Next slide, please. So closing the interview involves asking them, is there anything else that you want to say, or is there anything else that you want to ask? And that is just before you closing the interview. And once that they say, okay, no, nothing more, then you can tell them, okay, so we'll meet after 1 week or 2 weeks or 1 month, whatever is the plan. And then tell them, in case you want to contact us, here is a number. You can contact us on this number. So this number is like leaving the door open, right? You are giving them some number through which you or your team can be contacted. If you do not want to give your personal number, do not give your personal number. Give them the department number or the hospital number. Give them some number through which they can somehow get to you in case they have something, right? And then we finish with how we started, with a greeting. You have an eye contact, a smile, and nodding of your head, and what is culturally appropriate at the end. Next slide. So that is how we are going to end. So some take-home messages. Empathy. It is an experience. Empathy as an experience depends on how we behave with our patients and families. So this is what I talked to you about in the beginning itself. Patients take away how we made them feel. They take away that emotion. They take away that experience. They are not going to remember all the fancy things that the hospital had, all the machines and all the uh, glitz and glamour of a five-star hospital. They don't remember all of that. What they remember is how they were treated, how they felt over there. Were they treated warmly? Were they made to feel welcome? Did they feel that they were cared for? And all of that depends on our skill in communication. So empathy, that is, we are with them, not sympathy. Sympathy is feeling sorry for them when they're suffering. Empathy is trying to feel how they must be feeling. So it takes some skills to learn empathy. So these kind of communication skills, non-verbal skills and verbal skills, demonstrates an empathetic behavior. And this is what the patients remember about how they were made to feel. And mostly that is what they remember also. So talk less, listen more, practice body language, and remember the verbal do's and don'ts. I guess we'll stop here. And I am happy to take any questions if you have any right now, or maybe we can have the case presentation and subsequently we'll take questions. So it's over to you, back to you, Ed.
Yes, sir. So, participants, do you have any doubts or experiences or anything else to be clear? Please ask your questions.
Or they can
Sir,
put
one,
questions
sir,
in
one,
the
one
chat.
question.
Yes, yes,
One,
yes,
que-
yes.
one question, sir. In this special palliative COVID situation, how can we express our facial as well as the touch behavior to the patient? Facial expression, we cannot express this inside the mask as well as the shield. There is just no chance to express our, especially as a caregiver or care provider, how can we express our facial expression in this COVID situation? That's-
First of all, Ajay sir, very nice to see you.
Thank you, sir.
It's after a long time. Right. Yeah. So yes, COVID is giving us some challenges in our ability to communicate. And what you're saying is because we are wearing a mask and a shield, the finer nuances of communication, that is what you've seen on the facial expression, may not be seen. However, as I said earlier, if you smile behind the mask, the it is seen in your eyes, even if you're wearing a shade, or even when I'm wearing a glass. And more importantly, it is going to reflect in your voice. If you're smiling, your voice will automatically become uh, very, very comforting. It will be a welcoming tone of voice if you have a smile on your face, even if the smile is hidden behind a mask. So some component of smile will be still visible on your face, in your eyes especially, even if you are wearing a mask and a shield. And definitely your smile will be heard in your voice. Apart from that, I am also using some exaggerated body gestures when I'm wearing a shield and I'm always wearing a mask and shield. So now, just to tell them that I am seeing them and acknowledging them, now I'm shaking my head a little more prominently. Earlier, I will be doing like that. Now I'm doing like that. And I'm using my hand gestures more often. So basically, it is like the difference between cinema and drama. When you are on a stage doing drama, your body language is more exaggerated. Those who are familiar with drama and stage performances, they will know the difference. In cinema, because the camera can be very close up, it can zoom into your eyes and your face. You don't have to be exaggerated in your body language. There is also this joke about Tamil cinema and Malayalam cinema, where the Tamil's gestures are very exaggerated, whereas the Malayalam gestures are more subdued. Also, cinema and theater on a stage. Theater, you have to show exaggerated gestures because the last person sitting on the last seat, should be able to see what is going on. Whereas in cinema, the last person can see what is going on the big screen. So it is a bit of exaggerated body language is also coming into play. I wonder after 2 3 years of COVID, and finally when we are out of mask and things like that, we may still be I may still be doing exaggerated body language, and that will appear very stupid once these things are off. So right now, I'm making this little bit of fine adjustment to my body language.
Okay.
I hope that helps.
Sir, one more question, please.
Yes,
Sir,
please.
now it is not a common practice to discuss the option of treatment to the patients in palliative care as well as common health system. How can it be possible, sir? The treatment options with the patient.
I think just like everything, this is communication skills and the need for participatory healthcare is something that needs to be taught to the healthcare professionals from a very young age. From the day you get into medical college or nursing college or physiotherapy college, whatever, from day one, you have to put it in your education system that you are not the lord and master of health. The patient and family has an equal stake in the patient's healthcare as you, the healthcare professional. So we somehow, this is not part of our education, and hence it is not part of our psyche. So this has to go into the system that patient and family are equal stakeholders in healthcare system.
So, shall we start the case presentation? Here, Mrs. J, who is 70-year-old female, diagnosed with quadriplegia. She had a fall from height since 1997, having recurrent infection, fever, and a bed sore, and she became bedbound since 23 years. She is also having type 2 diabetic mellitus and hypertension since 2014, and episodes of seizure and on neuro medications. Insight about the diagnosis: patient is aware of her condition, and family is aware of all the illness trajectory. Prognosis is not aware well because sometimes patient become disoriented. Husband is unaware, and daughter is aware about the condition. Regarding palliative care, patient is not aware well, and family have a good awareness. Her family overview consists of her husband, who is 72-year-old man, and their only daughter, Mrs. She is 45-year-old, um, and she is a BA literature graduate. Mr. J is 72-year-old, who is one of the primary caregiver of Mrs. J. He is short-tempered and aggressive in nature, that is reported by her daughter. Mr. J gives all medication for his wife, but forget to give on time as he is getting old. This S, 45-year-old unmarried daughter, is another care provider. She provides physical care for Mrs. J. Father and daughter has a strained relationship. Father is not willing to take care of Mrs. J's daily needs and believe that he become infected by caring his wife. He does not want to get his daughter married due to the concern of Mrs. J's care and financial burden. Mr. J is not allowing his daughter to do any activities other than Mrs. J's care. Example, watching TV on reading newspaper and all. Mrs. is very hypertensive and she gets tremors when irritated. Mrs. J is in an extreme emotional distress by seeing her husband's attitude towards family. So here it is the ECOMA. This family does not have that much relationship with the extended family members, as well as no regular source of income. So there is a weak relationship between friends also, and the family having a good strong relationship with the Palim India, as well as to the specialist hospital where Mrs. J's regular treatment is going on. The daughter having a strong bond between our church and the religious institutions. Regarding the socio-economic overview, Mr. J was a businessman, but he lost everything. Family is staying in a rented house. It is very difficult for them to find money to travel for the treatment and buying medications due to their financial concern. No other source of income and financially drained. Mrs. also discontinued her job as her mother became very weak and nobody is taking care. Regarding this spiritual overview, Mr. J had not yet accepted his current financial situation. At the same time, he is worried about his future. Mr. J is concerned that his daughter does not have a job, but he is not willing to provide proper care for his wife so that she can go for the work. But he is not at all willing to take care of that. Emotional distress expressing by father as anger, anguish, and aggressive towards the daughter when she tells about the physical care of her mother. Miss is cope up with through visiting church and doing worship. She does not have much social relationship. From her words, it seems she has burned out by continuously providing care to her mother. Though she has plans for future regarding the marriage, she is having some dreams, but her concern for her mother pulls her back and may herself stay in home. The challenges faced by the team, Mr. J is not interested to interact with the team and even not possessed eye contact. He is always in a hurry while team visit the home and used to go out. He does not like the team talks with patient and daughter. So considering the total pain, um, the physical problems which the patient and the family suffer, sleeplessness, urinary tract infection and retention, recurrent fever, bedsore, loss of weight for the patient, psychologically emotional pain, compassion and fatigue for a daughter, anxiety, loneliness, anticipating grief, poor social interaction. Socioeconomically, financial challenges, difficulty to meet rent, unable to pay medications expense, unable to pay travel expenses, and no source of income. Spiritually, hopelessness, and why it's for our family. So why me? That question is there for the Mrs. G. The interventions include physical aspects, uh, regular catheteral change, um, advice for the administration of plenty of oral fluids, on antibiotic for reducing infection, bedsore management. Psychological aspects, individual and family counseling, SWOT analysis for the daughter to identify her strength, weakness, and opportunities, threats. So that help her to maintain some more social interaction and have a kind of self-realization. Next is emotional ventilation for patient and daughter, vocational rehabilitation for daughter, refer to the nearest community health service. Dissemination of information regarding social security schemes of government for a source of income to Mr. J, and which helped the team to have an effective interaction with Mr. J as he identified that the team is concerned about his condition. About the discussion points, what are the effective communication skills that could have been used in this case? How can we try to address the communication barriers possessed by the father? So this is regarding the scenario. Thank you.
Slowly he gets isolated from the society, and people, they get insulated from this person, because once they come into contact, it's possible that they may asking for some favors, the people will start moving away. So it is very, very important to see the extended family support, friend support, how we can garner that. It is the art of getting the resources in terms of volunteers or extended families like cousins or brothers and sisters. All those people, they'll have to come and see that how they can contribute for the welfare of this particular family. whether it's a daughter or father is a particularly appears to be a difficult person to handle. Some kind of this psychological counseling will be definitely be required. Probably with this, I would like to stop it here and leave it to the others so that they can take it forward.
Thank you, sir. That was a substantial contribution you made to today's discussion. Thank you so much for that. I would like to ask Reshma, because he did mention about probably the difficulties that the palliative care team had, maybe initially in getting through to the patient's family. I understand there was a lot of complication. So I would be very interested to hear from you. What were the difficulties you came across and how you were able to overcome them?
Sir, actually, as I told, he is not at all giving any kind of, he is not at all looking into the team. When we are going there, he used to go out. So, so these kind of situations happens repeatedly. Then we with very patiently, we have waited there for a long time for this man. And with so much patience, we all just started the talking there. And we used to wait for a long time and started this conversation. And the sessions repeatedly we tried to reach him. And more than 6 or 7 sessions we had there, very limited communications only happened. But even like that also, we just having a bond with the family. And we started talk. We are giving some to just we want to make some empathetic approach towards him. So we could help him with some kind of facilitating some governmental schemes and support. So that kind of conversations helped us to reach him. So then he tried to inquire about how this is possible and how can do this, because as of that time, this lady is also does not have any kind of pensions and all, because as she's disabled, she has their governmental Kerala governmental pensions is there, but she as the family is not having any kind of income. So when we try to facilitate these things, he's just here for us, and like that the communication we started, and thereafter we facilitated. So he started to talk with us through the phone, and then he started in a lot of things about his frustrations, what are the difficulties with the communicating with his daughter. So all these things he shared with us through phone, and thereafter we went, he much more attentive towards us. So like that, slowly we are developing that, as Sir Ramakrishna sir told, a trust and a bond which we are creating.
Well, thank you, Reshma, for that explanation. I think there are some comments. Would you like to,
Yes,
read out?
Yes, sir. Caregivers need to be deal more empathetically so that they may feel that their efforts are appreciated. Moreover, one of patients' concern is the amicability at home. And for effective communication, making a rapport with Mr. J was very important through constant effort. It could have been possible only through some personal conversations with Mr. J. Like Dr. Biju suggested, we have to give him that feeling through our looks, body language, tone, that we are here to help you, not to blame you. If we succeed in taking him in confidence, that collectively we can try to minimize the problem facing by each one of them. So we have tried a lot to make a very strong rapport with the patient's husband. So he was actually in the initial stages, he was reluctant to agree with this or to admit the things happening around, but a lot of time was spent to make a good rapport with him. which is already mentioned by Reshma. And I think, yes, caregivers definitely need to be deal with more empathy because they are the actual invisible patients. Their efforts, their hard works, their struggles, which always be like neglected, or no one usually appreciate their sufferings. So yes, of course, they have to be deal more empathetically, since they are the real invisible patients in this case. Many invisible patients, almost every patient, in every patient cases, there would definitely be some invisible patients. And in this case, yes, Mr. J is one such, and an empathy should definitely be depicted. Yes.
Yeah, probably I may come in for a moment. This Mudra.
Yes, sir, please proceed.
Yeah, okay. I 100% agree with you, Gayatri, but there's a very wonderful this observation you made, that we normally miss out on the miseries of primary caregivers. We don't find out what are their sufferings and how energized they are, and how they are sapped with this, with their energies. We don't understand their daily chores, how they're managing those things. We focus on mostly on the patient and his problems rather than the primary caregiver's problem. As we anticipate there has to be improvement in the quality of life of patient, it can happen only with the participation of primary caregivers if their quality of life is better. As a primary caregiver, for me, if suppose in my house somebody is not well, whether my daughter or sister, my wife, if I am not fit enough, I will not be able to share my fitness. So it becomes very, very incumbent on the primary givers themselves that they need to be fit enough to provide service. This we normally miss it out. And as far as you were telling, we are only seeing the consequence rather than seeing what was done earlier. These are things which many times the notes also, it will be missing. The efforts made by the primary caregivers, it will be many times it will be missing. How hard they are working to make the both ends meet. It is so we don't praise their efforts at all. And second thing is that the empathy part. Empathy is an innate ability of every human being. Even the newborn child will be having empathy in its mind. Probably, for example, if it is everyone's experience. Probably 1 year, 1.5 years child, when the mother is crying, it will immediately go to the mother's lap and sit there and starts crying. Why a 1.5-year-old child should cry when the mother is crying? The child doesn't know why mother is crying at all. There's no reason. It just feels the pain of its mother and starts crying. It is only the effort we need to make to acknowledge and fine-tune that particular value called empathy. This is what we are losing out. As we grow in the ladder, because of the many competitive environments, we are relegating empathy to the background rather than it should be always in the foreground, and palliative care perfectly provides the platform for that. This is what I wanted to convey. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Ryan D'Souza explained that it's important to somehow get Mr. John on the care team side, seeing his biggest concerns are, yes, financial and care needs for Mrs. J. This needs to be addressed first, so that the doctor can be relieved partially of the entire burden. If the community or church or government schemes could help on the financial side, that would help getting the trust. Once that is established, if the community can help with some of the care needs, then that could help to build trust and slowly take the pressure off the primary caregivers. Yes, of course. So any more suggestions or comments from the team?
Hello. I would like to make a comment here. The daughter how educated, what was her education qualification was not told. So I'm just, if she is a very well educated person, maybe initially if she can take up a part-time job or a part-time to help them financially little bit, where and where she can hire a person to take care of her mother for a few hours to begin with, and if she becomes more comfortable, maybe she can increase the time possible. So that way she gets a much needed break, as well as the mom is also taken care of, and it might also relieve maybe partially the financial burden. Since I don't know what is her education qualification, I'm not sure, but this is just a suggestion.
Yes, of course, we agree with that. And Miss Yes, she is 55 years old and completed her
45 years, completed BA Literature.
completed BA Literature.
But the problem is, if Jay is able to take care her very well, she is able to go for a job. Otherwise, actually, she is not able to concentrate. She had tried it before, but what she is telling, like, she is not able to concentrate while going, because she is getting jobs usually in some other areas not near to her place, as they are staying in
Ma'am, a
her home.
suggestion
That is
again.
also a problem, because when
Since,
they are
since she is a BA Literature, right? So maybe something like tuitions, and nowadays since there's work from home, maybe a teaching opportunity from home itself. So she doesn't really leave her home, but at the same time, it gives her an outlet. It also, I mean, she interacts with other people. At the same time, she's doing something constructive for herself, and at the same time providing for the family. So things like that could probably help.
okay. Yeah, that was a nice suggestion.
So, any more suggestions from the team?
Is there any chance for vocational rehabilitation to any of the members?
Yeah, actually, we had think about it. We started with the poultry farming, just to given some orientation and training. Means she also already talked with the two more agencies regarding how she can do that. And anyway, we need to convince it with Mr. J also. So then only he will allow, because as it is in a render home, it is not sure about how it will be possible there. But anyway, we have an idea regarding that. And she is interested to do a kind of poultry farming there rather than other things.
In this case, poultry farming means this small unit thing that is
Yeah.
10 inroads, 10 chicks or something like that. Backyard poultry is better.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
So, it's time to wind up the session, I guess, if nobody have any suggestions or comments. Dr. Biju, do you have anything to add on with this?
No, I was really sitting back and enjoying this discussion because so many good suggestions came up. So it was a real good experience for me to just shut up and listen. And I really enjoyed the interaction that was going on. Thank you everybody for pitching in and putting your ideas. It was really, really helpful. And I think this was one of the best interactions that I've had in recent times. It's always a pleasure to just sit and listen to people. That shows the level of involvement people are having, and that is very heartening. And thank you for all who participated by coming on and speaking or putting your words into the chat box. And thank you everybody for being so active. And thank you, Ajay sir, again. Great to see you. Meet again sometime, maybe on Zoom.
Thank you, Dr. Viju. It was very nice talk.
And thank you,
Talking to
Ramachandra.
you.
So very, very excellent insight you have put in and shared. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Presentation was really wonderful and it was very simple and very clear. Thank you so much, sir. It's a pleasure to have had you in the session. Thank you so much, sir. Thank
Thank
you.
you, sir. So let's wind up.
The feedback link will be shared in the WhatsApp.